Hey guys, welcome back. How was your spring break? I hope you all had a beautiful weekend, and I'm excited to continue the lessons that we did last week and do some more. I'm really excited by some of your creative projects, the videos, the PowerPoints. I got to look through some of them and they looked fantastic. So great job to everyone who turned that in. If you didn't turn that in yet, make sure to go back, read the assignment, and get that into me as soon as possible. Okay, we're going to start with a really quick recap of the lesson from last week, and that was simplifying radicals that had a negative in front, inside of the radical. So, for example, we have the square root of negative 28. Okay, so in order to simplify these, we need our list of perfect squares. So I'm going to come over here to the side and make that list. The first is 4, then 3 times 3 is 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 8 times 8, 64, 81, 100, 121, 11 times 11, 12 times 12 is 144, 169, and I'll pause there. So I'm going to start with 28, and I look at my list, and I'm like, well, I know it can't be bigger than 28, so I got to start somewhere around here. So I start at around 25, and I'm going to work my way up. In my calculator, I put 28 divided by 25. It gives me a decimal, so it doesn't work. Then I put 28 divided by 16. It gives me a decimal, so it doesn't work. Then I put 28 divided by 9. Decimal, doesn't work. Then I put 28 divided by 4, and it works. So we break this down. We're going to put the perfect square in front, so that was the 4. We're going to put the 7, because when I divided 28 by 4, I got 7. And then we're going to put the negative 1. The negative 1 is from that negative sign right there. Okay, so if you remember from last time, we learned that the square root of negative 1 is represented by I. That's an important thing that you want to definitely have in your notes. And definitely take notes on all of this. So we know the square root of 4 is 2. I don't know the square root of 7, so that stays inside of a square root. And the square root of negative 1, we just said, is equal to I. And that's the order that it goes in. So the I goes right there. So it's 2I radical 7. We'll try one more. So I'm going to do 72. I look at my list. That would fall right about here. And I work my way up. So I put 72 divided by 64 in the calculator. It doesn't work. I try dividing it by 49. I get a decimal. So then I put 72 divided by 36. And it works. So when I break it down, I'm going to do it the exact same way I just did. I always put the perfect square first. So that was the one that worked was 36. So I put the 36 in front. When I did 72 divided by 36, I got 2 and then negative 1. The only time I put that negative 1 is when there's a negative inside. If there's no negative inside, you don't have I. So this is square root of 36 becomes 6. Square root of 2 stays. The square root of 2, and the square root of negative 1 becomes I. And that is how we simplify. Okay, so now in your notes, you want to write this down. A complex number is a combination of a real number and an imaginary number. The A in the front here is the real part, okay? Then it's A plus BI. So the B that you see right here, that's part of the imaginary. So that B right there with the I, that's going to be the imaginary part. Here's an example. If you had the number 7 plus 3i, they're not like terms because they don't both have an I, so we can't add them together. So it just stays 7 plus 3i, and that's how I leave it. And this is a complex number. So that's what's called a complex number. Okay? All right, now we're going to learn how do we do things with complex numbers. Well, first, before we do, we need to know this. So we got a little joke up top. Hey, you guys want to meet my new friend? 2 asked to 3. Sure, but where is he? Well, he's right here. Why can't anyone else see him? Beats me. Ha 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 ha. Nobody can see him because he's imaginary. He's an imaginary friend. All right, you don't have to laugh at my bad jokes. So if we're doing I to the 5th power, what we want to do here, just to make sure my volume's all the way up, is I'm going to write it out. So, I to the 5th power just means I 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just like if it was x to the 5th, I would write x out 5 times. Now I'm going to be grouping. So remember that I times I, okay, is going to be negative 1. So this is a really important idea. Sorry. I squared equals negative 1. Put that in your notes, put a box around it, and highlight it. You really want that to stand out. Okay, that's a really important thing. So anytime we have I squared or I times I, we replace it with negative 1. So here, I times I, that's the same as I squared, replace it with negative 1. Here, I times I, that's I squared, replace that with negative 1. So we've got that, we've got this, okay? And then I have an I left over at the end, so I just bring them down. Now I'm going to multiply everything that's left together. So negative 1 times negative 1, that multiplies to positive 1, and the I just comes down, and my answer is 1I or just I. Let me show you another one just to make sure you got that. Okay, so if you have I to the 3rd power, that's I times I times I, 3 times. Remember, I times I is I squared. And we just learned that I squared equals negative 1. This guy here at the end, he's all by himself. I bring him down. And that would be the simplified version. So I to the 3rd would be replaced with negative 1I. Okay, so this is just something important to know about simplifying. Now we're going to use all this stuff together. Now what we're doing is called operations with complex numbers. So write that down. Again, I told you to write these 2 things in your notes. You probably already wrote them down, but if you didn't, you can write them down here. That the square root of negative 1 equals I, and that I squared equals negative 1. That's a really important concept. Okay, so operations with complex numbers just means we're going to be adding, subtracting, and multiplying complex numbers. So it has the real part, the 3, and the imaginary part, the 6i. Okay, so this is just like we did earlier in the year. Whenever I have a plus or minus sign, I always have to put a 1 in front of the parentheses, just like that. And then I'm going to distribute that 1. So please pause it at any point to take notes on this and write down all the steps. So we distribute that 1, that stays positive 3, 1 times 6i, positive 6i. That doesn't change. Here I'm multiplying negative 1 times 5. That's negative 5. And then negative 1 times negative 2i, that's positive 2i. Now I combine like terms. So see, this is not too hard. It's just like we've done earlier in the year. So these guys are both real numbers and they can be combined together because they have no variable with them. I add in my calculator 3 plus negative 5 and I get negative 2. Then I have positive 6i. I don't know how that just happened. Okay. Negative 2. Now I have positive 6i and positive 2i. Those are like terms because they both have an I, just like if they had an X. So I add those together in my calculator and I get plus 8i. Just make sure when you write your answer into Delta Math that you put the real number first and then the imaginary number in the back. Because if you wrote 8i minus 2, you wouldn't get the right answer for that. So it has to be in the right order. Negative 2 plus 8i. Awesome. We're going to do 2 more examples and then we're all finished. So the next 2 examples, and again, pause, go back, anything you want. Here, we're multiplying because the parentheses are touching each other. So you can use the box method or FOIL. Do whichever you prefer. I'm going to do FOIL, but feel free if you want to do the box. Actually, I'll just do 2 at a time. Okay, so first I'm multiplying 4 times 3, that gives me 12. And then 4 times negative I gives me negative 4i. Now I'm going to distribute the 6i to each of those. 6i times 3 is positive 18i, and 6i times negative I is negative 6i squared. Ooh, something should pop out to you, and that's the I squared. Remember that we said whenever we have an I squared, we're going to replace it with a negative 1 every time we have an I squared. So I'm going to bring everything else down the same way. Because there's no other I squares. This is just an I right here, so that's why I don't replace it. And I multiply this together. Negative 6 times negative 1 is positive 6. Just bring everything down to make it easy. And then I'm going to just combine like terms like I just practiced. So the 12 and the positive 6 are like terms because they have no variable. I add those together and get 18. And then the negative 4i and positive 18i, add those together and I get 14i. Okay, like terms, fantastic. And I'm done. Last example, and then you never have to hear me and you can just practice. So what we're going to do here is the exact same thing, but notice it's not written out. Instead, it's to the second power. That tells me I have to write whatever's in parentheses 2 times. So I write this twice, 5 minus 2i. Now I'm going to go through the exact same thing we just did, where I'm going to do FOIL or the box method because it's multiplication. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times negative 2i is negative 10i. And then I distribute the 2i. Okay, negative 2i times 5, is negative 10i. Negative 2i times negative 2i is positive 4i squared. Don't forget that squared because it's I times I. That's why it's I squared. And again, we just learned that whenever I have I squared, I'm replacing it with negative 1. Everything else is going to come down the same. So I can multiply that together. That becomes negative 4. Bring everything else down. And then we just combine like terms. So the 25 and the negative 4, I can add those together and get 21. And then the negative 10i plus negative 10i, use a calculator because it's negative 20i. Some of you guys might have thought it was canceled out. Make sure it's in the right order and you've got your answer. Okay, last one that we're going to look at and then we are all done. Okay, here's our example 4. If A equals 5 plus 3i, B equals negative 4x. Find the value of BA squared. All right, well, I just have to plug in. The B was first, and then it had an A next to it and a squared. And I have to put parentheses anytime I plug in. So the B is going to be what the B is equal to, negative 4x. That goes in parentheses. And then the A is going to be what the A is equal to, 5 plus 3i, close parenthesis, and the squared goes outside. You may be thinking to yourself, what do I do first? Well, we always do that exponent first. So we're going to do the 5 plus 3i, like we just practiced. You have to write it 2 times. And then you're going to do the FOIL or box method, whatever you like better. So you get 25 plus 15i, and then distribute the 3i, plus 15i, plus 9i squared. And remember, the I squared, and most of the time you're going to end up with an I squared. Sometimes it might be an I to the 4th or something. You replace that with negative 1, bring that down, and when you multiply that, you would get negative 9. And I make my eyes kind of weird, so you may be wondering, why did she put that little curly on? That's how I draw it. So you add 25 plus negative 9, and you get 16. And then you add 15i and 15i, and you get 30i. And that's how you do these problems, and that would be your answer. Have fun. I'll leave you with a little joke, little Thanksgiving joke. See if you can get it. And I will see you all on Wednesday.